Hi.
Hello again. Ray has just been discussing Hebrews 10, that familiar text about not forsaking the gathering, and between Marcus Dodds and B.F. Westcott we saw that that has the force of not abandoning the Christian assembly, where the unique Christian assembly where you meet in the name of Jesus Christ.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't abandon their Jewish meetings. That's not what the commentators understand here.
Because if they did, they would have been actually losing their witness, their Christian witness to the community. If they sacrificed that one, they wouldn't have been having a unique way of witnessing.
And the pressure, obviously social pressure, family pressure, would be upon them to keep doing their Jewish stuff. If you're going to sacrifice anything, it would be the uniquely Christian assembly. So that's the evidence that this word epi-synagogue has to do with the uniquely Christian assembly that some of them were beginning habitually to miss. Probably from social pressure, but the threat, as we saw at the end of the last one, was if you do that, you may be swept away with the Jewish system, which is about to be destroyed when Hebrews is written.
But they had this other pressure too of the Jewish community. They didn't want to be thrown out of the synagogues either. So I think there was always that tension.
Yeah.
There must have been a tension for them.
Yeah, I think we'll get to that passage in a few minutes, right?
Mm-hmm.
So Ray now takes up the point that he made before, that there was no set pattern in the early church, no New Testament rules about it in terms of worship and frequency, etc. But what indications are there in the New Testament as to how frequently Christians did get together? So Ray says, in considering the biblical evidence of the early Christian community, the remarkable fact is that we find there simply no set pattern laid out for us regards Christian gathering. Initially, following Pentecost, the apostles and others gathered daily in the temple for discussion and exhortation. I think I want to say there, I don't get the impression they were there for discussion. I get the impression they were there for worship like their fellow Jews.
Right.
At the hour of prayer.
That's right, it was called the hour of prayer.
And if they had been there for discussion, i.e. evangelism, I'm pretty sure there would have been a hornet's nest right away.
Well, it would have been a disruption of what was already planned.
Yeah. It is unrealistic to assume that most would be able to do so after that initial period, nor is there any indication that they did. Their sharing meals with their brothers in various homes is listed right along with their temple gatherings, and since meals were often the occasion for Christ informally conveying spiritual benefit, this was likely true in this case.
At Ephesus, during the first 3 months, Paul met at the synagogue, hence on a weekly basis each Sabbath. When moving out of the synagogue, he then held discussions daily in the lecture hall of Tyrannus, doing this over a 2-year period. It is illogical to assume that those who met with him were the same persons each day, since few persons could be free to spend their time this way for a 2-year period. We know that Paul was there day by day. We do not know definitely of anyone else who was. Nor is there anything to show that thereafter in Ephesus or in any other place Christians met with identical frequency. In many cities in the Roman Empire, the slave population was very large, forming fully 1/3 of the population of larger cities, such as Rome, Ephesus, Antioch, and Corinth. While many of these were not mere laborers, but held positions at times of quite high responsibility, it is still unlikely that most slaves were free to attend gatherings at will.
Yeah. There's no doubt that most new Christians would have trouble going to all Christian meetings if they were very frequent, let's say daily. But on the other hand, I don't think it's fair to assume that when Paul got to Ephesus, he was only at the synagogue weekly. It does make the point in Acts, Luke makes the point that sometimes Paul and Barnabas and Silas would go to the Sabbath synagogue meeting, but in the big cities there were synagogue meetings virtually every day. They had at least 2 or 3 worship services during the week.
So every time in the New Testament, when you go through Acts, just anytime they arrived, they go to the synagogue. So it would seem odd if it was only on the same day, on the Saturday, that they were always arriving at a town. It seems like that was the place you went to meet people.
Yeah. So you have this picture that they go to the synagogue, and what did they do? Disrupt the service and start preaching Jesus as the Christ? Because sometimes they're there for weeks. Mm-hmm. So it's not very likely they're just going to go in and take over the service. What is more likely is, since the synagogue was being used not just for worship 2 or 3 times a week in the big cities, but also the community center. It served as a community center. It served as the school or education center if you wanted advanced education, and it also served as the Jewish court. Yeah. So there were people there mulling around all the time.
Even when they have their readings of the scroll, like, you get the impression that if somebody was visiting, they'd often ask them if they wanted to comment on the text read. And that would have been an ideal opportunity for the apostles or any Christians to point out things from the Old Testament that foreshadowed the coming of Christ and the events that had just happened. And I think they would probably use those opportunities, but they wouldn't disrupt. They wouldn't be in charge.
That's right.
They would just be commenting on something as it came up.
Yeah. There is a footnote to all of this about the Ephesus situation. Ray says, the evidence points to similar synagogue attendance among many Christians initially. Yeah, it does. That attendance evidently continuing until opposition made it unfavorable. Mm-hmm. And then he references the text that I think you were referring to.
Yeah.
Which is John 16.
Okay.
Verses 1 and 2, that last night upper room discussion, so-called, Jesus and the apostles.
Tells them what might be coming, or will be coming. I have spoken these things to you, that you may not be stumbled. Men will expel you from the synagogue. In fact, the hour is coming when everyone that kills you will imagine he has rendered a sacred service to God. So opposition was coming.
You don't get the impression here that Christ is saying, though, distance yourself from your community, because that's where the community met, the synagogue. Mm-hmm. So who's going to do the separating? The separating is going to be...
They're going to expel you.
You don't disfellowship yourself.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And that's not the impression you have when you think of the early
You just
disciples.
think they abandoned it.
Yeah.
And just started their own thing.
And Ray also references here Acts 2:46 and 5:42, and those have both been dealt with, those two texts about house to house or door to door, in our door to door series. So we'll put a link onto that at the end. Mm-hmm. And
the Acts
also
2 one was the 7 characteristics of the early church.
Right. And we'll put that link on at the end too. And he also references Acts 19:8-10. And this has a couple of surprises. Yes, he's doing something daily, for one thing. His instruction continues daily. Okay. And the end result is also a bit of a shock if you're used to witness methodology.
Entering into the synagogue, he spoke with boldness for 3 months, giving talks and using persuasion concerning the kingdom of God. But when some went on hardening themselves and not believing, speaking injuriously about the way before the multitude, he withdrew from them and separated the disciples from them, daily giving talks in the school auditorium of Tyrannus. This took place for 2 years, so that all those inhabiting the district of Asia heard the word of the Lord, both Jews and Greeks.
So again, he only separated from the synagogue after a prolonged period of about a season, 3 months. And when the opposition became so strenuous, you couldn't really do it anymore effectively.
Right.
And the surprise at the end, how did the work get done in Asia, this great province of the Roman Empire?
Well, he booked a place in the school, and people were coming there. And I guess they were hearing about it from each other, because it says the whole community ends up hearing about the Lord.
Well, not just the whole community, i.e. Ephesus, but beyond that, right? What does it actually say?
It says all those inhabiting the district of Asia heard the word of the Lord, both Jews and Greeks.
So all the 7 churches we read about in the book of Revelation, plus Colossae, which is not even mentioned in Revelation, all these churches were founded during this period, apparently, but not by canvassing.
Yeah.
Not by door-to-door or any other form of evangelism, but rather what we would call lecturing and mentoring and discipling in a school. And that's the normal way that the word spread in the early church world. So we're going to link on your screen, yes, the door-to-door episodes or videos where we discuss the text that Ray cites here, Acts 2:46 and 5:42, and also 7 characteristics of the Christian congregation in that early period. And at the end of that one, there's a link to the follow-up, which is about Acts 3, where Peter and John go up to the temple at the hour of prayer. And also a third link, which is
Paul, his last trip
to
Jerusalem, where he's going to the festival.
Surprise, surprise.
And he's, at the suggestion of James, told to offer a sacrifice.
Yeah, so that's 30 years into that first and also into the second generation by now. He's going up to the temple for that last visit to Jerusalem. And of course he gets arrested there. But yet the fact that he's there and then offers a Jewish offering.
Yeah, I think a lot of Christians don't notice that or just read right past it.
Or think he compromised.
Yeah, or think he compromised. But I think it's very telling that, it wasn't an automatic split. Okay, now we don't need that anymore. Because the Jewish religion was set up by God. He's the one that instructed them. So why would they want to? They're not going to toss the Old Testament. We don't either. We have a Bible that has Older and New Testament in it.
So James, when Paul goes to him to visit the elders in Jerusalem and on that trip, James actually says we have thousands of believers, all of whom are zealous for the law. You don't expect to find that 30 years after Pentecost.
No, and you view that as somehow wrong. But they haven't left something that was wrong. They've added on to something that was right.
Well spoken. So next time Ray talks about the informal gatherings among the early Christians and the methodology of those meetings and how did authority work in the early congregations.
Okay.